So there are so many books on the subject of whiskey, sort of published all over the world and sort of all through, the last 100 years or so, right up to the modern day. And some by famous whiskey authors or spirits writers, others by, whiskey fans or people that are just sort of interested in the subject. So, it's very difficult to choose the best in that case, but presenting our top 10 whiskey books today. Of course, top 10s are always subjective, so a lot of you might agree or disagree with what we've picked, and of course, there's some very famous books that we haven't included in this, but these are the 10 our favourite 10 whiskey books that we actually own. So of course, please leave your comments of your own personal favourites in, sort of attached to this video. We'd love to see what you enjoy reading and what type of book you're looking for. But what we've tried to do here is pick the 10 that, of our personal favourites that we actually own, that we actually paid for, and they cover a breadth of history within the whiskey industry. They cover a breadth of styles. So let's kick off. The first one is the Malt Whisky Yearbook. Now this is an annual release by a gentleman called Ingvar Rond. And this is arguably our favourite book of the whole selection. And it has been, we bought our first copy. You can see them on the shelf behind me here. We've got them dating back to 2008. And this is when we sort of kicked off our whiskey journey. And we learnt so much from it and continue to today. It's still the only whiskey book that I personally carry around in my bag to refer to. And the reason for that is it's got a number of very interesting articles on what's going on in the whiskey industry, current trends, hot topics, etc. There's also a ton of statistics and industry data in the back as well. But the main part of it is actually here. You get each distillery, particularly the Scotch whisky distilleries, they all have their own page. So you have some sort of a timeline of history and some basic facts like production, capacity, this type of thing, foundation date, and then you get this timeline of everything that's happened at the distillery sort of over its history. And then you get here this sort of, so we've got Glen Scotia here actually that I've picked, but here you get what's going on at the moment, and also then sort of any new releases that have happened since the last edition. So look out for that. Normally comes out sort of each year in the autumn. So the Malt Whisky Yearbook, that's our number one. The next one is a little bit similar in a way. It's called the Scotch Whisky Distilleries, and this is by Misaka Udo, and this is first released in 2005, and this is not a book it kind of takes that information from the Malt Whisky Yearbook to a different level. This is not a book to sit by the swimming pool on holiday and read. This is a reference book. So what they've done here is actually go through and list all the technical details, the production details, and also a little bit of historical data as well. But you could look at it and say this is quite dry, but here you've got Glenfiddich, for example. You've got the sort of wash still size, mash ton size, capacity of the washbacks, what cuts they take the final spirit at, and so on. It's just a fascinating book, and again very good for reference. And not only distilleries that are actually in production, but historical. They went and researched the same data for all as many distilleries as they could find there. So Scottish Whisky Distilleries by Misaka Udo. That's number 2. So these are not in any particular order, by the way. They're just in the order that we picked them. You know, despite saying that that's our favourite, we couldn't really put things in 1 to 10 lists, so we're just doing them in a fairly sort of random order. But the next one is Whisky by Ianus MacDonald. So you have to be careful how you say that first name, by the way. Ianus MacDonald. And this is from 1930, so this is a 90-year-old book. And it's widely regarded as being the first whisky book to speak from the, rather than talking about the whisky or the distilleries or, this type of thing. It's the first one really to talk about whisky from the drinker's point of view. So, it's regarded as a real, quite iconic, quite classic actually, because it's the first sort of drinks book, not just whisky book, but drinks book, to really look at the drink from the drinker's perspective. So, the cultural aspects, there's a few stories in there as well. Absolutely great book, lovely little book, just, sort of 120 pages or so. You could sit down, a good train journey or a plane journey or something like that, a couple of nights and you'll be through it. But, absolutely fascinating. So, Whisky by Ianus MacDonald, number 3. And the next one is, there's a lot of books like the next one. Whisky, A Tasting Course by Eddie Ludlow. Very good friend of ours, co-founder of the Whisky Lounge, who do the whisky festivals, whisky tastings and so on. But very recent book. So, 1930, the previous one. This was released last year, 2019. So this book, as I say, there's a lot of books like this that tell you how to drink whiskey, how it's made, ins and outs of the industry, different barrel sizes, what they do, blah, blah, blah. But this is one of the best in our opinion because it does it in it goes into enough depth, but without getting a bit geeky. And there's always something to learn actually inside. And there's lots of good sort of photography, diagrams and so on here. There's sort of tasting sort of wheel and sort of thing there. There's some lovely photography. There's also a mix photography and sort of diagrams as well. So really great. Great book if you wanted to buy any of these books. This would be the one for a whisky beginner or someone that was starting their whisky journey and wanted to find out more, because even though we're 12 years down the track of our whisky journey, we still learned a hell of a lot looking through this. So absolutely fantastic book. Whisky, A Tasting Guide by Eddie Ludlow. The next one, the 5th book, is The Definitive Guide of Canadian Distilleries, and this is by Davin de Kergamo and Blair Phillips. So pretty much everything we know about Canadian whisky has come from the pen of Davin de Kergamo. He's got a couple of other books that we've got that, there's not so much information or product available in the UK surrounding Canadian whisky. So it's a little bit of an enigma to us and, probably the British public in general. But this book, it doesn't just cover whisky, by the way. It covers all spirits. There's over 200 distilleries covered here, from, the massive, it's a vast country. But it covers everything from, anyone producing spirits. So it could be absinthe, vodka, whiskey, gin, whatever it is. So again, it's got a lovely mix of, a little bit like the Malt Whisky Distillery. There's sort of pages that show distilleries and give you a bit of background of what's going on, a bit of history of each place. It covers the massive places. It covers the small artisan producers. Whatever they're doing. It's fascinating. But it also talks about. There's also some cocktail recipes. There's loads of tasting notes in there as well. So, search out. But this is brand new. It literally came out sort of start of the year, like February, March time, something like that, 2020. So, we're right back up to date right back up to date here. So that's the Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries by Davin de Kergamo and Blair Phillips. So the next one is, arguably the whisky book, and it's the first real, what I would call this sort of travel log style, and it is, an absolute classic. It's the Whisky Distilleries of the United Kingdom by Alfred Barnard. Now, this is, one of my personal favourite books. Some couple of people that I know describe Barnard as the original whisky blogger, because this was published in 1887, so it's over 130 years old, and he basically set off to travel around the UK and visit every single distillery that was producing whisky, be it grain whisky, pot still in Ireland, single malt, whatever it was. So he set off on this epic journey. It took him 2 years, and there's all sorts of facts and figures and so on in here, from each place that he visited. And of course, that's a great snapshot, because a lot of the distilleries are still in operation, so you can see sort of how it was then at the end of the Victorian era to, sort of compare them to what they are now. But of course, a lot of them have disappeared. Some maybe mothballed, but some have gone forever, no longer exist. So, absolutely fascinating insight into the whisky industry in this late Victorian era, which was a massive boom time. The 1880s and 1890s were a massive boom time for the whisky industry. So, absolutely fabulous book. But what I particularly enjoy about it is that he writes in quite a dry way, let's say, but not in a bad way. He gets the information across, but there's also this aspect where there's all types of stories of him travelling to and from the distilleries or getting to the next place, and the people that he meets along the way, or the colleagues or friends that he's travelling with. So it's not just about whisky distilleries. It's about, there were no trains. He was travelling by horse and cart, or getting a lift from someone, or walking here or there. Absolutely, as I say, a great insight. I could talk all day about this, but, we're on a slight timescale here. So there we are, the Whisky Distilleries of the United Kingdom by Alfred Barnard. So the next one is actually a modern travel log style book. And this is Chasing the Dram by Rachel McCormack. And this came out 2 or 3 years ago, 2017. And this is, Rachel's a whisky fan. She's not a whisky writer per se, but is a journalist, food and drinks journalist, and appeared on the radio, TV, etc. But is a whisky fan, and was brought up, sort of on whisky from relatively young age, if that's okay to say. But she decided to again kind of delve into the sort of the social aspect of Scotch whisky and what it means to the people, and there's a bit of visiting distilleries and so on here, but there's also a lot of sort of funny stories. It makes it such an engaging, enjoyable read as well. And she's joined by, again, some friends along the way. So it's a bit like a cross between Whisky by Ianus MacDonald and then the Alfred Barnard, where there's a bit of travel, there's a bit of social commentary, there's a bit of mixing with like whisky with food and so on. So just such an engaging read, and quite different from most other whisky books that we have. This is one that you can sit down by the pool on holiday and sort of read cover to cover, rather than some of the others you kind of dip into a little bit from time to time, as and when. So Chasing the Dram by Rachel McCormack. The next one is Whisky by Stefan Gabagni, and this is a bit more of a sort of handbook style. Lovely sort of orange edging to the pages there. But this is a bit more of a handbook style. And this was originally published in German in the mid-90s, and then 1997 it appeared in English. And, there's just some lovely, lots of information about distilleries, and it covers really all the sort of major whiskey producing regions of the world, all the major brands, all the major single malt brands, blends, etc. And it's accompanied by these lovely pictures here, these lovely illustrations by a gentleman called Günther Mattei, and it just gives the book a really kind of sort of retro feel to it. It feels a lot older than it actually is, considering it's only just over 20 years old. It even smells like, an old library. It's absolutely a fantastic book, lots of fun and well worth a read as well. And one thing I should just point out actually with Barnard that I forgot to mention is that there is, some lovely, there's a whole set of these lovely, within Barnard, these sort of lovely line, sort of etching style illustrations, which were very sort of big in the time at the time in the sort of 1880s. So, yeah, just a whole series of these lovely illustrations. But we digress. I just forgot to mention that earlier. So, the 9th book is one called Scotch Mist: The Lost Distilleries of Scotland by Brian Townsend. And this again came out in the 1990s, 1993, the original version, which is what this is. There's been a couple of other re-releases since, which have a slightly different cover, so you might have one of those. But this, he basically decided to look into the history of Scotch whisky distilleries that have closed down. So he found as much information as he could. Again, there's some lovely old photographs in here. So, here's Glenurgie, for example, just up near Peterhead. So there's lots of history, lots of photos. Also, he, for distilleries that closed, relatively recently, he actually sought out, some of the people that actually worked at the distilleries, during its last days, and so there's some of those stories kind of interwoven into it as well. So, an absolute fascinating snapshot of each place, sort of during its day, and with these sort of personal stories in places as well. So, yeah, well worth discovering if you can find it. Scotch Mist: The Lost Distilleries of Scotland by Brian Townsend. And then the final one isn't really a whiskey book at all. But again, it's called The Ultimate Burns Supper. But again, whiskey is involved. This is by a gentleman called Clark McGinn, who again is become a very good friend of ours. And we met him first actually when we went to one of our very first, when we were very fledgling whiskey bloggers. We met him at one of our first ever whiskey events that we went to, which was a Burns night supper. And we'd never been to one before, and Clark came out, he read the address to the haggis and was talking about the history of Burns night, which of course, celebrates the birthday of Scotland's most famous poet, Robert Burns. Clark is a world-renowned expert on the poetry, lifestyle, impact of Robert Burns and his writings, and has written this book which gives you everything you need to know, be it the history, be it what to wear when you attend a Burns night supper, what you can expect to happen. And of course, whiskey is intrinsic, it's interwoven into the whole Burns ceremony, especially now as, it's not just a Scottish thing, it's, spread. There's Burns nights all over the world. So, he talks about the sort of influence of whiskey and how it interlinks with everything to do with Burns Night. So yeah, another great read. As I say, not pure whiskey like the others, but still one of our favourite books. So there we are. That's our top 10. As I say, if you agree or disagree, then let us know in the comments. Also, sort of add your own favourite whiskey books, or sort of ones that you want to buy, and we'd love to hear. Thank you.